A police officer had just returned from a long night shift in snowy Portland, his loyal German shepherd walking faithfully at his side when he heard it, a faint sob cutting through the cold air. There, by the gates of a quiet park, stood a little girl no older than 7, clutching a worn sketchbook and trembling with fear. She whispered, "He always comes back," and those words froze him where he stood. What he uncovered that night would tear open hidden darkness and test the limits of love, faith, and courage. But what happened after will restore your belief in God's miracles and the power of family. Before we begin, tell me where you were watching from. Drop your country in the comments so we can see how far this story travels. And if you believe no child should ever face fear alone, hit that subscribe button, because this story might just change the way you see the world. The city of Portland lay buried beneath the weight of winter, its streets coated in layers of white that muffled every sound into silence. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, catching the weak morning light, while the Willamette River carved a slow, dark path through the frozen landscape. Bridges arched like solemn guardians across the icy waters, their steel frames glistening with frost. Few people braved the cold that morning. The parks and sidewalks were nearly empty, except for the faint tracks of joggers or the occasional bundled figure moving quickly between errands. It was a city hushed by the snow, waiting for spring but enduring the long patience of winter. Daniel Harris, a 36-year-old police officer, moved steadily through the streets with the practiced gait of a man who had walked his beat in every season. Tall and broad-shouldered, his presence carried both authority and quiet weariness. His short brown hair, flecked with the faintest hints of silver at the temples, stuck out from beneath his dark-knit cap. Hazel eyes, watchful and alert, seemed always to weigh the shadows, as though searching for threats others might miss. Daniel's face bore the faint ruggedness of a man who shaved quickly, never quite smooth, and whose features had hardened over years of seeing both cruelty and kindness on the job. Once, years ago, he had been known for his laughter and quick wit, but that side of him had dulled since the car accident that claimed his wife, leaving him alone in the quiet of their house. He still wore his wedding band out of habit, though he rarely looked at it. His colleagues often described him as dependable, someone who would stand his ground when chaos broke out, but those who truly knew him saw the solitude that trailed him like a long shadow. At his side walked Max, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a muscular frame and thick black and tan coat that bristled against the wind. His sharp amber eyes scanned every corner with the alertness of a trained protector, and his ears flicked at the faintest sound. Once a canine in the department, Max had been retired after an injury, and the line of duty left a faint limp in his hind leg. Daniel had adopted him immediately, refusing to let the dog be cast aside, and the two had become inseparable ever since. Max had a loyalty etched into every movement, always staying close to Daniel's stride, always ready to leap into action despite the ache in his joints. Neighbors often remarked that the dog seemed to mirror Daniel's soul, cautious, steady, carrying unseen scars, but still unwilling to give up the fight. That morning, Daniel had chosen to patrol near the river, a habit he had developed during winter months when his own thoughts became too heavy inside the silent house. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he followed the winding path by the water, his breath visible in the sharp, cold air. The city beyond was muted, its skyline softened by the steady fall of snowflakes. Max trotted beside him, leaving paw prints that quickly filled with fresh snow, nose twitching at scents invisible to human perception. Daniel's mind was not entirely on duty. As always, memories crept in unbidden. The empty chair at his kitchen table, the laughter that no longer echoed through his walls. He had learned to keep walking, as if forward motion alone might keep grief from freezing him in place. It was then, beneath the drooping branches of an old maple tree that leaned toward the river like a tired sentinel, that Daniel heard it. A faint sob carried through the still air, fragile enough that it could have been mistaken for the cry of a bird. He stopped, scanning the whitened park. Max stiffened immediately, fur bristling, head tilted toward the sound. Daniel followed the dog's gaze and spotted her. Half hidden among the thick roots of the maple, crouched low against the trunk, was a little girl no older than 7. She wore a cardigan once brown, but now faded and stained, over a blouse frayed at the edges. Her jeans were dirty at the knees, torn at one seam, and her small sneakers were soaked through with melting snow. She clutched a battered teddy bear with one arm and a worn sketchbook with the other, holding them as if they were shields against the world. Her hair, a soft shade of chestnut, fell in messy tangles across her pale face. Her lips were blue with cold, and her body trembled visibly. She pressed herself deeper into the roots, as though trying to disappear into the frozen earth. Her name, though Daniel did not yet know it, was Emma. 7 years old, thin to the point of fragility, she carried the weight of far more than her years. Her large brown eyes, wide and glistening with tears, were the kind that once might have shone with mischief or joy, but now seemed dulled by something older, heavier. Fear clung to her like the snowflakes on her lashes. She was the kind of child who had learned already to make herself small, to vanish in plain sight, to avoid drawing attention that could bring pain. She whispered words Daniel barely caught. "He'll come back. He always comes back." Those words were not just fear. They were resignation, a belief carved into her like frost that refused to melt. Daniel felt something twist deep in his chest. He recognized it instantly, not pity, but recognition. The sight of a small, hunched body trying to vanish into the cold mirrored the way he had carried his own grief. Invisible, yet suffocating. He knew that posture. He had lived it in his own way. Kneeling a short distance away, careful not to frighten her further, Daniel spoke in a voice softened by practice. "Hey there, you don't have to be afraid. I'm Officer Harris, and this is Max. We won't hurt you." His words floated gently in the air, but Emma flinched, clutching her sketchbook tighter, eyes darting between him and the dog. Max, as if sensing the delicacy of the moment, lowered himself slowly to the snow, resting his head on his paws, tail flicking once in a gesture of calm submission. His amber eyes remained fixed on her, protective but not threatening. Daniel tried again, loosening the cap on a water bottle he carried. He set it in the snow between them, the universal offering of peace. For a long moment, Emma stared at it as though it might vanish. Then, with the quick movement of a bird snatching a crumb, she reached for it, her small fingers trembling, and pulled it to her chest. She did not drink, but she held it as if possession alone gave her some control. Daniel asked gently, "Are you waiting for someone?" She shook her head almost imperceptibly. After a pause, her lips moved, barely audible. "I'm hiding." Before Daniel could speak further, a sound tore through the quiet, the sharp, angry shout of a man, distant yet cutting enough to silence even the playful cries of children on the far side of the park. Emma froze instantly, shoulders drawing up, eyes round with terror. Daniel's instincts took over. Without thought, he shifted his body to shield her, placing himself and Max between the girl and the direction of the voice. His heart hammered, but his voice remained steady. "It's okay," he murmured, his breath forming mist in the frozen air. "I'm not leaving you." Emma stared up at him, eyes searching his face for deception. Whatever she saw there seemed to convince her, for she shuffled an inch closer, her trembling form brushing against the protection of his shadow. The shouting faded, swallowed by the snowy distance, but Daniel did not move. He remained, guarding her, as Max's ears twitched at every sound. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something stir, a fragile thread of purpose pulling him back from the edge he had lived on for so long. They stayed that way for what felt like hours, though it was only minutes, until Emma's breathing slowed slightly. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the park, filling in footprints, erasing traces. Daniel finally spoke softly. "Let's get you warm." He offered his hand, but Emma hesitated. Instead, she shifted closer to Max, laying a trembling hand on his fur. The dog did not move except for a slow wag of his tail, his warmth radiating through the cold. It was trust, tentative and fragile, but it was trust. Daniel exhaled, a cloud of relief in the frozen air. Without another word, he stood, scooped Emma into his arms, and began the long walk back through the snow to his house. Max padded alongside them, leaving new tracks on the fresh white canvas. Behind them, the river flowed dark and silent, carrying away the echoes of a shout that no longer mattered. Snow clung stubbornly to Daniel Harris's coat as he pushed open the front door, the creak of the hinges echoing through the silence of his small house on the outskirts of Portland. The winter storm outside howled against the wooden walls, shaking the branches of the pine trees that lined the driveway. Inside, however, was another kind of cold, the kind that lingered in empty hallways and unfurnished corners, where laughter had long since faded. Daniel stepped across the threshold with Emma in his arms, her small body shivering even through the thick blanket he had wrapped around her. Max followed closely, shaking snow from his coat, his paws leaving wet prints across the wooden floor. Daniel set Emma gently on the couch, its cushion stiff from lack of use. She clutched her teddy bear tighter, her wide eyes darting nervously to every corner, as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. The house felt foreign to her, and truthfully, it had felt foreign to Daniel as well since the day his wife died. He knelt in front of her, pulling off his gloves, his voice calm. "You're safe here," he said, though the words felt heavier than they sounded. He rose, walked to the kitchen, and started the kettle. The familiar act was grounding, though his hands trembled slightly as he arranged mugs on the counter. The kitchen was neat, almost too neat, like a place staged for someone who never showed up. The wooden table had only one chair pulled out, a silent reminder of his solitary meals. The fridge was stocked with essentials, but little else: milk, eggs, bread, a half-finished carton of orange juice. On the wall hung a photo of Daniel and his late wife, taken in summer before everything changed. In the picture, she was laughing, sunlight in her auburn hair, her hand clutching his arm. Daniel avoided looking at it as he poured milk into a pot to warm for the girl. Emma sat stiffly, her feet dangling above the floor, sketchbook pressed to her chest like armor. Max lay down in front of her, head resting on his paws, watching her with calm, steady eyes. She seemed to relax slightly in his presence, as though sensing the dog's protective loyalty. Every so often, her fingers brushed against his fur, hesitant at first, then lingering longer. Daniel noticed, but said nothing. He knew trust wasn't built with words, but with small, steady moments. The sound of a knock startled them both. Emma flinched, scrambling back against the couch cushions. Daniel raised a hand in reassurance and strode to the door, opening it cautiously. A blast of frigid air swept in, carrying with it the scent of snow and wood smoke. On the porch stood Helen Brooks, his neighbor. She was in her late 60s, a short but sturdy woman bundled in a thick wool coat, a knitted scarf wrapped high on her neck. Her hair, silver and pulled into a tidy bun, peeked out beneath a knitted cap. Her face was round and lined with years, but her gray eyes carried a sharpness that saw through. Pretense. Helen had lived in the neighborhood longer than Daniel, and had always been kind, but never intrusive. A widow herself, she filled her solitude by baking, gardening, and keeping an eye on the people around her. "Harris," she said, her voice brisk but warm, holding up a covered tin, "I baked apple pie. Figured you'd want some before it cools too much." She noticed Emma immediately, her sharp gaze softening. "And who might this be?" Daniel hesitated, shifting his stance. "This is Emma," he said finally. "She needed a safe place." Helen stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, brushing snow off her boots. Her presence filled the kitchen quickly, the way some people carried warmth like a second skin. She set the tin on the counter, removed her gloves, and crouched slightly so she could see Emma at eye level. "Hello, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentle now. "Don't worry, I don't bite. I used to have a granddaughter about your age. She loved drawing, too." The words hung in the air, a subtle grief underlying them. Helen's granddaughter had passed away years ago from illness, a wound she seldom spoke of, but which shaped her tenderness toward children she encountered. Emma blinked at her, uncertain, but when Helen pulled a paper napkin from her pocket and slid a piece of warm pie across the table, the scent of cinnamon and apples filled the room. The girl's stomach gave a quiet growl. She shook her head at first, hesitant, then reached with trembling fingers to take the plate. She nibbled carefully, each bite cautious but growing surer, as though pie might be the first food in days that carried no fear with it. Daniel poured the warm milk into a mug and set it beside her. "It'll help with the cold," he said softly. Emma nodded, but kept her eyes down, hair falling across her pale cheeks. Max nudged her hand with his nose, a reassuring gesture, and she allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Helen straightened, crossing her arms. "She looks terrified," she said quietly to Daniel, her voice low so Emma wouldn't hear. "That child has been through something no child should." Daniel nodded grimly. "I found her hiding by the river. She didn't say much, only that she was hiding from someone." Helen's sharp gaze softened again, lingering on Emma, then shifted back to Daniel. "Well, Harris, I don't know what brought her to you, but don't you dare send her back into that snow. Children like her, they need a roof, a hand, even if it's temporary." Her words carried weight, shaped by her own loss. As the night deepened, the storm outside intensified. The windows rattled under the wind's assault, snow piling against the sills. Daniel found an old blanket and spread it near the kitchen table, arranging a pillow on the floor. Emma refused the guest room upstairs, shaking her head vigorously, whispering something about not wanting to be far away. So he let her curl, Up beneath the table, sketchbooks still clutched tight. Max settled at her side, his steady breathing like a lullaby. Daniel pulled a chair near the table, opening a book he didn't intend to read. He stayed there, a silent guardian, while Helen tidied the kitchen with the ease of someone who had always believed work was a way to keep grief from consuming her. She hummed softly as she washed dishes, the melody carrying through the room, filling the silence with a gentle rhythm. Emma's breathing eventually slowed, her small body relaxing for the first time since he had found her. Helen wiped her hands, glanced at Daniel, and whispered, "She trusts you, you know. It's fragile, but it's there. Don't let it break." Daniel looked at the child sleeping under his table, Max curled protectively at her side. For the first time in years, he felt the heavy silence of his house begin to shift. It wasn't warm yet, but it was no longer empty. The morning after the storm, Portland remained blanketed in white, every rooftop capped with snow, every branch glistening like glass beneath the pale sun. The neighborhood was hushed, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Inside Daniel Harris's modest wooden house, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and coffee, remnants of Helen Brooks's late-night apple pie. The heater hummed low, battling the chill that seeped in through old window frames. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor near the kitchen table, her oversized blanket trailing behind her like a cloak, sketchbook propped against her knees. Max lay curled beside her, his black and tan fur catching the morning light, his amber eyes half closed yet alert, ears twitching at every small sound. Daniel watched quietly from his chair, a mug warming his hands. He had not slept much. He spent most of the night glancing at Emma, afraid she might vanish if he let his guard down. But she was still there, fragile but real, her small hand occasionally reaching out to brush Max's ear, as though reassuring herself that he remained at her side. For a moment, Daniel allowed himself to believe that maybe things could hold steady, at least for today. Emma opened her sketchbook, and Daniel leaned slightly forward, curious. Her drawings were startling for a child her age. Thick, jagged pencil strokes filled the pages with unsettling images, looming figures with angry eyes, small children cowering under tables, and dark, shadowy shapes that seemed to swallow the light. Between those frightening scenes appeared something different, a woman with angel wings, her arms stretched wide as though to shield a child. The figure was repeated in several drawings, each time more detailed, hair flowing, face sad but kind, wings spread against darkness. Daniel cleared his throat gently. "She looks important," he said. Emma hesitated, chewing her lip, before whispering, "It's my mom." Her voice cracked on the word, and she pressed the pencil harder onto the paper, sketching a tree beside the angel, a tree with wide branches, leaves that looked like stars. Daniel studied it. "And the tree?" he asked softly. Emma traced it with her fingertip. "She said the maple by the river would keep me safe. She told me to draw it if I was scared, and she would find me again." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back quickly, as though ashamed to cry. Daniel wanted to tell her she didn't need to be strong, but he remembered his own grief and how words from others had always fallen flat. Instead, he reached down and scratched Max's ear. The dog responded by nudging Emma's leg, pressing his nose against her blanket. She let out a tiny laugh, brief, but it was the first sound of joy Daniel had heard from her. Later that morning, while Emma sat at the table quietly eating toast Helen had left behind, Daniel stepped into the hallway and made a call. His voice was low, cautious. He explained to the receptionist at a local elementary school that he had a child staying with him who needed help. They transferred him to the school counselor, Dr. Melissa Green. Melissa answered with a calm steadiness that immediately grounded him. She was in her early 40s, with a gentle Southern accent softened by years in Portland. Later, when they would meet in person, Daniel would see that she carried herself with a kind of practiced warmth. She was of average height, with dark hair streaked lightly with gray at the temples, tied back in a simple bun. Her clothing was practical, a wool cardigan over a collared blouse, slacks pressed neatly, and glasses that perched on her nose, with the precision of someone who noticed everything. People often described her as unshakable, but in truth, her resilience came from personal tragedy. Years earlier, she had lost her younger brother to neglect in foster care, and the guilt of not being able to help had driven her into a career of protecting children. "Mr. Harris," Melissa said on the phone, her voice steady, "children often tell their stories first through pictures. If she is drawing angels and shadows, she's trying to make sense of trauma. Bring her to see me when she's ready. We'll keep things gentle." Daniel felt a measure of relief wash over him, just hearing her tone, though he still worried about exposing Emma to strangers too soon. When he returned to the kitchen, Emma had drawn another picture. This time it was more direct. A man with sharp, angry features towering above a smaller figure. In his hand was a belt, drawn thick and dark. The smaller figure, curled up on the ground, had tears streaking down her cheeks. Daniel crouched beside her, his chest tightening. "Emma," he asked carefully, "is that him?" She nodded slowly, her lips trembling. "His name is Travis. He gets mad. He hurt my mom and me." Her voice broke, and she clutched the teddy bear as though it could shield her from memory. Daniel's jaw clenched, anger flashing through him like heat against the cold air. He forced his tone to stay soft. "Emma, none of that is your fault. Do you understand? None of it." She shook her head faintly, not ready to believe him. He wanted to press further, but stopped himself. Trust was fragile. He would not break it by rushing her. Helen arrived later with more food, brushing snow from her shoulders as she entered. Her sharp eyes softened when she saw Emma hunched over the sketchbook. Helen set down a loaf of fresh bread and sat at the table, speaking casually about the birds outside, about how snow made everything look like sugar. Slowly she drew Emma into conversation, asking about the colors she liked best. Emma whispered, "Blue, like the sky before it gets dark." Helen smiled and nodded. "My granddaughter loved blue too." The mention of her loss hung quietly between them, but Helen's tone remained steady, giving Emma a thread of connection. Max, sensing the emotional weight, climbed halfway into Emma's lap despite his size, making her giggle through her tears. Daniel exhaled, realizing how vital the dog had become in just one day. That evening, as snow began again, Daniel sat at his desk, staring at the phone. He dialed Melissa's number once more, this time leaving a message. "Dr. Green, I'll bring her in tomorrow." He hung up and looked toward the kitchen. Emma was curled up beneath the table again, her sketchbook open to the drawing of the angel, with wings spread wide, shielding the small girl from shadows. Max lay close, his head resting protectively across her lap. Daniel realized then, with a clarity that startled him, that keeping Emma safe was no longer just a matter of duty. It was something deeper, something that reached into the hollow space grief had carved in him and began to fill it. The storm rolled in by late evening, heavier than the weather forecast had warned, and by nightfall Portland was swallowed in a white fury. Snowflakes, thick and relentless, plastered the windows and blanketed the quiet street, muffling the usual hum of the city. The Harris house stood like a solitary fortress on Maplewood Drive, its windows glowing faintly against the darkness. Inside, Daniel Harris paced restlessly from room to room, his nerves stretched taut like a bowstring. The memory of Travis lurking at the edge of their lives gnawed at him more fiercely with every gust of wind. Emma sat curled on the couch near the fireplace, her sketchbook open on her lap. The firelight painted her small, delicate face in warm hues, but her eyes darted often toward the windows as though expecting something dreadful to appear beyond the frost. She had chosen to draw a dogwood tree again, its branches reaching up in stubborn defiance against shadowy figures in the background. Max, the 6-year-old German shepherd, lay at her feet, his head resting across her ankles. His amber eyes were half closed, but his ears flicked at every creak in the house. His muscular body, black and tan fur thickened by the heat, looked every bit the guardian he had become, alert, loyal, and watchful. Daniel knelt beside Emma, trying to soften his voice despite the tension coiling in his chest. "You're safe here," he whispered. She nodded but kept shading the dark outlines in her drawing. Children who had lived with fear, Daniel thought, rarely believed safety at the first promise. He brushed her hair back gently, then stood and checked the locks on the doors again. Earlier that afternoon, Helen Brooks had come by to deliver a loaf of fresh bread. She had scolded him with her sharp tongue, gray wool scarf wrapped snugly around her neck. "Storm like this, you'd better double-check everything," she warned. "Men who hurt children don't stop just because the snow's falling." Her stern expression had softened when she saw Emma peeking from behind Max, and Helen had crouched awkwardly to offer the girl a peppermint candy, murmuring, "You keep that close, sweetheart. Good luck charms are stronger than people think." That small act of kindness had stayed with Emma all evening. She kept the candy in her pocket, fingers brushing it as if drawing courage from its crinkled wrapper. The house fell into uneasy quiet. Daniel brewed coffee he barely touched, the bitter steam rising between him and the swirling blizzard outside. His thoughts churned. Tomorrow they would meet Dr. Melissa Green at the school, and the future of Emma's safety would begin to shift from uncertain refuge to official process. But tonight, everything still hung on his ability to keep danger at bay. A noise cracked through the storm's lull, a faint crunch, deliberate and heavy, not the random settling of ice. Max's head snapped up, ears sharp, a low rumble building in his chest. Emma froze mid-stroke, her pencil hovering over the paper. Daniel's pulse spiked. He moved to the window, parting the curtain slightly. Through the blur of snow, he saw a shape at the edge of the yard, dark against the white, moving with purpose. Travis. Even through the distortion of snowfall, Daniel recognized the broad frame and the nervous, erratic movements. The man wore a thick jacket with the hood pulled low, but nothing could mask the fury in his stride. He carried a heavy duffel slung across his back, and in one gloved hand glinted the edge of a crowbar. Daniel's blood went cold. He motioned quickly for Emma to follow him. "Basement, now!" His voice was firm, sharper than he intended, but Emma understood. Clutching her sketchbook, she scrambled to her feet as Max pressed against her, guiding her toward the narrow stairwell. Daniel crouched to meet her at the door, forcing calm into his words. "Go down with Max. Lock the safe room door. Don't come out until I tell you or the police knock. You hear me?" Emma's eyes brimmed with tears, but she nodded. Her trembling hand squeezed the peppermint candy in her pocket before Max nudged her down the steps. Daniel waited for the faint click of the reinforced lock before drawing his gun from its holster. The back door rattled violently. The crowbar screeched against the frame, a sound that made Daniel's teeth ache. He crouched behind the kitchen island, gun steady though his hands quivered. "Not tonight," he muttered to himself. The storm raged around them, but inside the house every sound magnified. The slam of metal, the groan of wood, the labored breathing of a man desperate to get inside. Daniel snatched his phone, fingers stiff with adrenaline, and dialed 911. His voice was tight, clipped. "This is Officer Daniel Harris. My address is 214 Maplewood. An intruder is breaking into my home. He is armed with a crowbar and carrying restraints. Send units immediately." The dispatcher assured him officers were en route, but each second stretched unbearably long. Daniel could hear Emma whimper faintly from the basement, Max's growls reverberating in low, steady warning. Finally, the distant wail of sirens cut through the storm. Red and blue light flickered faintly across the snow outside. Travis cursed audibly, the sound muffled but clear enough to chill Daniel further. He tried to pry harder, striking the door with reckless force. The police arrived in a rush of headlights and slamming car doors. Among them was Officer Sarah Jennings, a tall woman in her mid-30s with neatly tied black hair and striking light blue eyes. She was slender but carried herself with firm authority, her winter uniform dusted in snow as she advanced with her flashlight. Sarah was known in the precinct for her composed demeanor under pressure. Years ago, she had lost her younger brother to gang violence, an event that made her fiercely protective of children in danger. She barked orders, crisply, as her partner flanked the back of the house. "Police! Drop it now!" she shouted, beam of light cutting through the storm to land on Travis's hooded figure. He spun, crowbar raised, but slipped on the icy porch. Officers surged forward, Sarah leading with practiced precision. They wrestled him into the snow, his duffel spilling open, coils of rope, rolls of tape, and a knife clattering onto the frozen ground. The evidence glared up at them like an accusation. From inside, Daniel exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He lowered his gun and moved quickly to the stairwell. "Emma, it's me," he called softly. The lock clicked, and the small girl launched herself into his arms, tears streaming down her cheeks. Max bounded after her, pressing his weight protectively against both of them, tail wagging but body tense. Daniel whispered hoarsely into Emma's hair, "He's gone. He can't hurt you anymore." She clung to him as if her life depended on it, and in that moment Daniel felt something shift deep within. A fragile, undeniable bond that no storm, no man, no shadow in the snow could sever. The morning after the storm dawned pale and quiet. The snow softened into drifts that glowed under a shy sun. Portland stirred slowly awake, plows groaning down streets and neighbors clearing porches. But for Daniel Harris, the world had shrunk to a single destination, the courthouse downtown. His suit felt stiff as armor, the navy fabric pressed yet heavy with the weight of expectation. Emma walked beside him, her small hand tucked into his larger one, her other arm wrapped tightly around her sketchbook. She wore a simple blue dress with a brown cardigan buttoned up crookedly. clothes chosen not for style but for comfort. And Mrs. Brooks had fussed over her hair until it gleamed like chestnut silk. Max padded alongside them, his black and tan coat shining after an early brush, wearing a simple leather leash. His steady gait seemed to say what Daniel could not. "We will protect her." The courthouse loomed as they approached, a tall red brick building capped with white columns, its marble steps slick with slush. Inside, the high ceilings and echoing footsteps made the place feel cavernous, intimidating. Yet as they entered the main courtroom, Daniel was struck not by the architecture, but by the faces. Friends and allies filled the benches. Helen Brooks sat near the front, her scarf draped neatly around her shoulders, a look of fierce pride softening her usual severity. Dr. Melissa Green, in a slate-gray dress, nodded encouragement, and standing near the side was Officer Sarah Jennings, her tall frame composed, dark hair braided neatly, her presence a reminder of the night's danger turned to safety. At the center of it all sat Judge Rebecca Halpern, a woman of 58 with salt and pepper hair tied in a bun. Her posture was upright, dignified, and her sharp blue eyes scanned the room with an authority that made even seasoned lawyers clear their throats nervously. She wore the long black judicial robe with a pale silk scarf, a touch of humanity woven into her otherwise stern appearance. Known for her fairness and her unwillingness to tolerate evasions, Judge Halpern carried the weight of decades in family court. A rumor whispered she had once fought her own battle for custody in her youth, a fight that had left her fiercely committed to protecting children. The case was called. Across the aisle sat Travis Benson, wrists chained, his broad shoulders hunched in defiance. He glared at Daniel with the simmering hatred of a man stripped of control. His lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Peter Lowell, whispered furiously in his ear, urging calm that Travis could barely summon. The district attorney began with grim efficiency, recounting the attempted break-in, presenting the crowbar, the rope, the tape, and the grainy footage from Daniel's security camera. Officer Jennings took the stand, her voice steady as she described subduing Travis in the snow. Her account was clinical, yet edged with personal conviction, the memory of her lost brother flickering briefly in her eyes before she refocused on the oath she had sworn. Then came the testimonies of those who had seen Emma's transformation. Helen Brooks spoke of the girl who had once stood trembling on her porch, too afraid to answer a simple question, and contrasted it with the child who now smiled shyly when offered cookies. Dr. Green provided her professional perspective, explaining how Emma's drawings had shifted from shadows and monsters to flowers and light, proof of healing nurtured by safety and trust. Finally, it was Daniel's turn. He rose slowly, hands clenched into fists to hide their tremor. He spoke not as a policeman, but as a man who had lost before and refused to lose again. He told the court about the night he found Emma in the park, about her whispered plea not to be taken back. He confessed to the loneliness that had once consumed him and how protecting this child had forced him to open his heart again. His voice caught when he said, "She's not my daughter by blood, but she is my daughter by every choice that I've made since that night." When he sat down, the room was hushed. All that remained was Emma's voice. The clerk called her gently, and for a moment she clung to Daniel's hand, her knuckles white. Judge Halpern leaned forward, her tone unusually soft. "You can bring your sketchbook with you, Emma, if that helps." Emma nodded. She climbed onto the witness chair, legs too short to reach the floor. Her sketchbook rested on her knees as she opened it carefully, flipping past pages of jagged shadows until she reached the ones she wanted to share. "When I lived with him," she whispered, pointing at the page filled with dark scribbles, "I was scared all the time. It felt like monsters everywhere." The courtroom held its breath. Then she turned to a newer drawing, a dogwood tree blooming in spring. Beneath it 3 figures, a tall man, a little girl, and a dog with glowing eyes. "Now I can draw flowers, because I feel safe. I want to stay safe. I want to stay with my family." For a long moment, even Travis fell silent. The only sound was the shuffle of the judge's papers. Judge Halpern studied Emma with eyes softened by compassion before lifting her gavel. "This court hereby terminates the guardianship of Mr. Benson and grants sole legal and physical custody of Emma Reynolds to Mr. Daniel Harris. Further hearings may address permanent adoption, but effective immediately, Emma is to remain with Mr. Harris under the protection of the state." The gavel struck once, echoing like a thunderclap through the hall. Relief rippled across the room. Helen exhaled shakily, Dr. Green dabbed at her eyes, and Sarah Jennings permitted herself the faintest smile. Daniel sank to his knees beside Emma, who looked up at him with wide, shining eyes. "Does this mean I can really call you Dad now?" she whispered. His answer was immediate, his voice breaking with emotion. "Always. Forever." Emma wrapped her arms around his neck, sketchbook pressed between them, and Max padded forward, nudging his head against their embrace as if sealing the bond himself. When they left the courthouse into the crisp winter air, the snow had stopped falling. Sunlight spilled across Portland, glinting off the dogwood branches that lined the street, their bare limbs promising spring to come. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt not just hope, but certainty. The monsters had been banished, the shadows driven back, and in their place stood family, fragile, imperfect, but real. In the end, this story is not only about a policeman, a child, and a loyal dog. It is about how God works through ordinary people and moments to bring light into the darkest nights. The snowstorm, the courtroom, the drawings of flowers, all of these remind us that miracles do not always arrive with thunder and lightning. Sometimes they come quietly, through the courage to protect, the trust of a child, and the love of a faithful companion. Every day, in our own lives, we may face storms. We may feel alone, frightened, or abandoned. But this story teaches us that God never forgets his children. He places people and blessings in our path, just when we think we cannot endure anymore. Like Emma, who found safety in the arms of someone who chose to love her, we too can find hope and protection when we place our faith in him. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it with someone who needs to be reminded that miracles are real. Leave a comment below and tell us what this story means to you. And if you believe with all your heart that God still works wonders today, write amen in the comments as a prayer of faith. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of hope, healing, and the power of love. May God bless you and your family today and always.